Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to talk about sub 2, and I'd like to talk about resources, if I may, at this point, for Ms. Bosler and for Mr. Taylor. We have proposal by the governor to move money fairly quickly for Proposition 1 and 1E, which was 2006, and then drought expenditures. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the rationale behind the timing of these, and then I want to ask some particular questions about or plans for the timing of these. And then I have some details that were raised by the LAO that I want to talk about for a moment.
So first, on the Proposition 1E bond monies, the monies dedicated to flood management. These monies are unique in that they actually have an expiration date. And so it's very important to us that we get those monies out as early as possible, and hopefully in the first few months of this calendar year. Because there's a lot of needs, especially in the Central Valley, as you know. We do propose a 10-year encumbrance period for those bonds. Flood projects are very complex because there are multi-funding streams that need to come together to fund a project. And the federal government has had some delays in the area of flood management. So these monies are very critical that they go out as soon as possible so that we can get those projects going. And there are a lot of critical needs in the state in relation to flood management. In terms of Proposition 1, the monies proposed for appropriation through the Budget Act are really, I think, following the Water Action Plan very closely. And so this is a discussion that's been had for several years now that really culminated with the plan that was put out last January. And so our rationale is that many of these strategies have been well debated and discussed, and the time is now to move the monies out, especially in the continued severe drought that the state is faced with. These projects are needed more than ever now, and so the effort is to try and move as much money, $533 million, in the Budget Act.
All right. I'm looking forward to further detail on, I agree with you about, let's talk Proposition 1 first. People expect the funding, voted for the funding, and they want to see these programs move forward. Many of them are new programs. So it's really important to see some greater detail in the budget sub about how exactly we're going to get these out the door quickly. Because one of the things that also is important is that we expend the money wisely and that they have the intended accountability mechanisms that we all felt were important in putting in. Let me talk to you about 1E, which is a $1 billion expenditure that you're looking to put out. You must put out quickly or we lose the money. The proposal, as I understand it, is that we move the money out, but we give the department 10 years to, DWR, 10 years to commit the funds, and then an additional 2 years beyond that, which, as the LAO points out, that really exceeds anything we've done before. We also allow for transfers of this money between state, local, and capital outlay as is decided by DWR. That makes me uncomfortable. I think it's important the legislature have an oversight role over such a large amount of money. On the other hand, we don't want to lose the ability to use that funding. It is important, as you say. So I wondered if the LAO might speak to that, and if you have any suggestions, which we'll certainly be looking at in the subcommittee fairly quickly, to figure out how we can maintain an oversight role without setting up, without jeopardizing those 1E funds.
Well, it's been 10 years, and so it sort of makes you wonder if these were such critical, high priority, why is it taking so long? We recognize there are problems in many cases. But you've raised, I think, the key issue, Senator, about the length of time that it's available to spend them, and about the detail that you should reasonably request, whether it's specifying the projects that you want, the amount of control that you want to give the department. But that's all up to you, and I think those are the legitimate issues you have before you about how much specificity you want to place on them as opposed to giving sort of carte blanche to the administration.
Okay. All right. I'm looking forward to those hearings fairly quickly. The last issue, and there are other issues, I'll leave those to my colleagues. Certainly, I know with respect to transportation, there are, I'm sure will be questions. With respect to parks, what is the plan? Looks like we're treading water. Oh, heavens. Well, we don't want to do that. Parks are important to so many members of the legislature and to the people of this state. And it seems as if we don't have a plan. The administration doesn't have a plan. Where are we going on parks?
Well, the 8 pages, our budget does outline a plan. There's been a lot of really hard work, and a lot of people have participated in the Parks Forward Commission, and there are several recommendations that the state continues to work on. We now have a new transformation team that's really, I think, going to try and bridge the gap between those recommendations and many of the challenges that are internal to the department. And the transformation team, the turnaround team, is really hard at work already, making assessments and building recommendations for the governor about the next steps to really put the park system on stable footing for the long term. There is $20 million allocated to the park system for deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance continues to be a big struggle for many of the parks properties. And there is $16.8 million from the parks, the State Park Revolving Fund, to maintain levels of park services for the budget year. So while it looks like there isn't any new big initiatives, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to really drill deep in what the systemic problems have been with the system, and put very strong administrative structures in place, and really move the parks system forward to adapt to the needs and wants of Californians in their park system. So we look forward to additional conversations about that with the legislature, working with the legislature about legislative changes that may help to facilitate the turnaround. But it is something that we are working hard at behind the scenes right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wolk. Senator Hancock, followed by Senator Block and Senator Roth. Senator Allen, Senator Pan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we're going to be jumping around a little bit under this format, but I would like to briefly revisit the questions regarding corrections. I think that by all the expectations that we had from the blueprint that was developed by the Department of Finance and presented to the Budget Subcommittee on Corrections a number of years ago, we were anticipated to save money. I don't know if the administration has an analysis that they could share with the legislature about why that hasn't occurred, why in fact we keep having increased budgets in the department. Not to mention, every single year that I've chaired the committee, we have then gotten a deficiency request for over $100 million without the prerequisite coming to the legislature for it. And that's made me think that this year we really need to look at what's happening here. Why, if we habitually overspend, don't we budget for that overspending? If, on the other hand, it's a matter of a great deal of sick leave, workers' comp retirements, or staff turnover, what does that tell us about morale and training within the institution? So I think that I welcome, Senator Nielsen's interest as well, and I know the other members of our committee in looking at why those costs are going up. Now, I would point out that one of the major factors here, besides salaries and facilities, as Mr. Taylor mentioned, is the number of people in prison and in jail. And I just want to recall our former colleague, Chuck DeVore, who is an assembly member here, who is now the national policy director for an organization called Right on Crime, which is a very Republican organization. Newt Gingrich and Grover Norquist are on its board of directors, and they are advocating essentially for rehabilitation to bring the prison population down. And Mr. DeVore did speak to this committee last year, and I remember his words. You want to shrink government? I'll tell you how. Rehabilitate, close some prisons. Texas has closed 3 state prisons. We seem to be expanding. Even though the public has repeatedly said through initiatives now, Prop 47 being the most recent, but also Prop 36 2 years ago, that it wants to bring that population down. So I do think we need to seriously get the data we need to understand why mistakes are being made. And which means that we really have to look at what happened in Stockton. And I'm wondering if the Department of Finance or the LAO can tell us. I was sort of getting the mistakes were made vague comment, but was this mistakes in physical planning that we just built a building that is unique in the country and doesn't work? Or is it that we seriously underestimated the severity and extent of illness and mental illness in our state prisons? Why would we go from 794 staff to adding an additional 700, doubling the staff? It's not a digital error.
They're very good questions. It's a number of different factors. It is a very large facility. I haven't actually been there myself, but I understand that it is quite vast. And because of that, it is difficult to get around in. Also, my understanding is there were some decisions made at the receiver's office, and he's not here to defend himself, so I will just say what I've heard. That I think they thought they could do things in a different way. They thought, this is a sick population. We will organize the offenders in a different way than we do in the main regular prisons, and that didn't really work out. And so they really had to shift and change their management plan. Once the facility was operated, they actually did pause intake for several months to really get the operations under their feet. And the receiver has reported to us that these additional staff are really needed in order to activate the entire facility and to utilize the entire facility that has been constructed. So that's why we've put this forward. A very compelling case that these additional staff are needed. But we do want to continue to work with you to get your answers or your questions answered. So,
thank you, Mr. LAO.
We are still in the process of trying to assess whether or not the request is appropriate. For example, one of the things we're trying to take a look at is how the staffing proposed for CHCF compares to the secured wing at a hospital that CDCR refers inmates to. So we're trying to take a number of different approaches to assess whether or not the staffing is adequate, or whether it is potentially too rich, or whether additional staffing is necessary. But we're still in the process of conducting that analysis.
Okay, I would again note for both DOF and LAO, because I think we'll be asking questions later. You know, the receiver did come and assure the legislature last year that the problems have been fixed. And that's why it's surprising to suddenly see a need to double the staff. I know the receiver does not have to be here. He does not report to the legislature or the administration. He's made that clear to us on a number of times. But I do think we need to study what happened here. Because we're going to repeat history if we don't learn from it. And I believe the receiver makes a higher salary than the secretary of CDCR. So what are we spending our money for here? What are we getting? If we can document that, maybe we can begin to resolve exactly what we have to do to get out from under this situation. But I do have an additional question, which is, under Prop 47, we expect the prison population to go down significantly, and also the population in county jails. Is there any talk within the administration about taking the money that should be saved and putting it into the treatment services that will be needed in the community? I'm hearing from police chiefs and sheriffs and others that what we lack is the infrastructure for drug treatment for the individuals that will now be only charged with a misdemeanor for personal drug use, but who may need help.
So the impacts of Proposition 47 continue to be an issue that we are monitoring closely. The initiative passed in November, and actions started immediately. But the overall impacts on the state prison population and the impacts on the locals are really still very much in flux. As you know, Proposition 47 requires that the savings be dedicated to specific purposes, starting with the 2016-17 budget year. So there's no assumption of savings implied in our budget proposal this year, because we continue to work on evaluating that. In terms of the local drug treatment network, this is something that the administration in a different department, the Department of Healthcare Services, has been working hard with the counties to put a new system in place with the expansion of behavioral services in the Affordable Care Act. There is an entire new system of care that it's envisioned at the local level to provide drug treatment services to those individuals that are qualified for Medi-Cal. So there is a lot of going on. There's a lot of transition. There's many discussions with the federal Center for Medicaid Services as we implement this new system. Also, over the last 2 years, there were many allegations of fraud in the existing drug treatment programs, and there's been a significant effort at the Department of Healthcare Services to recertify those providers and really do a reset on the program. But a lot is happening, and a lot will be built, but these things take time. So
No, in fact, I think we would, the legislature would like to partner with you in doing that, because if we can get out of our silos in this particular case with Prop 47, which should have a very beneficial impact on the people of California, and have the systems collaborate, I think it would be very good. Just one last question. My reading of the Coleman latest mental health ruling by Judge Carlton really is that it should not cost any more money particularly. It's basically on the treatment of mentally ill people in solitary confinement, something that many people feel should not be happening. And it does give a number of changes in program, but I wondered if you did see any particular expenditures that you'll be presenting in the budget around the Coleman, Judge Carlton's September Coleman ruling.
We do have $13 million built in the current year and $42 million in the budget year related to the most recent Coleman Court orders related to use of force and the use of segregated housing. And there are additional expenditures because the order has really required that we run the administrative segregation units in a different way. And for those individuals that are not there for administrative actions, but they're there because they are being protected from the other inmates, they need to be treated in a different way. They need more time out of cell. They also need to be in a special step-down unit so that they can get back to the general population or a special needs yard as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of intricate management changes that are underway in the prisons now related to that order.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hancock. Senator Block.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have many questions, most of which I'll save for sub one, but a few questions now, kind of basic questions. With the 39% increase, I guess, in education funding we've seen over the last few years, two questions. Number one, and this is for finance or LEO, how close does this bring us to where we were at peak per pupil funding? And secondly, where does this put us in terms of ranking among the states, not an exact rank, but in per pupil spending? You know, in the 70s we were near the top, or at least in the upper third. Lately we've been near the bottom 4 or 5. With all this expenditure going to education and Prop 98, have we improved much in terms of where we are relative to the rest of the states? So.
Senator, on the first question, as far as what is our per pupil funding adjusted for inflation, you have to do some sort of adjustments to get an apples to apples from where we were in 7-8. Our best estimates that we're about $200 above where we were in 7-8. So that's obviously good progress to at least recover what we lost during the Great Recession. As far as the rankings, it sort of depends on which rankings you use. There's different ones that are reported, some that adjust for local cost of living. Those we tend to be pretty low. And I'm not sure on just the ones reported at the federal level if we would be in the sort of like high 20th position or something. I don't know if Ms. Goon has it, but we haven't looked at that real recently, but it depends on which index you use.
Okay, thank you. Finance, any comment on those?
Nick Schweitzer with Department of Finance. Nick Schweitzer, Department of Finance. Yes, we would concur with the LAO on both of those answers. Certainly in absolute dollar terms, we are above where we were in 07-08. When you start doing an adjusted dollar terms, you know, we're, depending on how you do it and whether you factor in the reductions that were made, the deficit factor, and of course we've got plenty of room to go on fully funding the LCFF. So there's more funding that, and you know, the budget certainly puts in significant new funding for that purpose to get school districts back on solid financial footing and fully implement the formula. In terms of rankings, again, it depends on the methodology. When you do, I think the latest ranking I saw, the state has moved up a couple of places, whether it be, there's one ranking that does sort of absolute dollars statewide, and the state is generally around the middle in that ranking, and then there's another popular ranking that tries to do cost adjustments state by state, and the state's been very low, one of the lowest states on that ranking. But on both rankings, I believe we've come up a couple of places. The other thing to note on those rankings, they're always a couple of years behind, so they're not really factoring in the significant increases we've seen in the last couple of years either.
Okay, thank you for those responses. I'm not sure they're the same response, so it seemed like more optimistic from the LAO's office than finance. Is that, am I reading that right? Or?
I'm not sure I would read it that way.
Okay, all right, because that was surprising to me. So, but you were saying in the top 20, you thought, or?
Oh, no, I mean, as Dick was saying, I think if you just looked at the numbers, if you were to have the rankings today, and as he said, there's a big lag, I think we would maybe close to the middle. But
Okay.
I really am a little hesitant just because we haven't looked at the numbers for a while.
Good enough, thank you. Moving away from K-12 for now, and we'll get back to that in sub 1, of course, in detail. But to higher ed, it seems that from multiple sources, PPIC says we need 1 million more baccalaureate degrees by 2025 than we're on track to prepare right now. California Competes says 60,000 more a month. I just read somewhere that by 2025, 41% of the workforce will require bachelor's degrees, and we're on track to prepare about 35%. So by all of those measures, it looks like we're underperforming in terms of turning out graduates with bachelor's degrees in terms of what the workforce needs. The governor's proposed increases without additional tuition or fees, anything I look at, the projection wouldn't come to meet those needs. So what does and the governor talks about more efficiencies. So is it finance's opinion that the resources being provided now will meet those figures? And what efficiencies in particular are going to get us there?
Well, workforce development is something that we thought a lot about this past fall. I think the reauthorization of the Workforce Investment and Opportunities Act really gave the state an opportunity to take a really hard look at their workforce development preparation. And the community colleges are really the bedrock of that system. And there is $1 billion in additional resources for the community colleges, including additional growth there. But at the CSU and UC, there continues to be a lot of work at both segments, really different issues at either segment. At CSU, we still have a very low completion rate in the 4 years that it used to take to get a bachelor's degree. That is because of a variety of factors. But we really want to find ways to really reduce the time it takes students to get to 2 degrees. And when you do that, then you make room for additional students.
If I could interject then, Senate Dems has come up with a plan that would increase funding for hiring more faculty to teach bottleneck courses, because a lot of students aren't getting through in 4 years, we think, because they can't get some classes they need, to increase funding for academic advisors, because there certainly is a segment of students who just aren't taking the right path, the most efficient path. While the governor is reluctant to increase funding for higher ed for the UC and CSU in particular, more than what's already been outlined, if funding is proposed for those needs to make the exit more efficient, completion more swift, to get students out in 4 years, is that something that finance thinks the governor might support?
So all of these spending priorities have to be weighed against other things that are currently in the budget. I think that the administration has put forward a budget which is a budget that we think we can afford. Those types of investments would be ongoing, and as I mentioned in my opening comments, the balance of the state's budget is precarious over the forecast period. And so really committing to additional ongoing spending above the stabilization plan that we put in place 2 years ago for CSU and UC really is something that would have to be weighed against other things in the state budget that are also ongoing in nature. So I mean, that's really the discussion that I'm sure we'll all be having.
Okay. And how does the LEO feel about investment in faculty for bottleneck courses and academic advisors? Is that a way to go?
Well, certainly that may be one way to go. I mean, for example, we've often and long advocated doing year-round school. That's another way to offer classes that are bottleneck or high demand. Gets people through, makes better use of our facilities, reduces your long-run investment that you need to have in facilities. So I think you should put all of these things on the table, Senator. Good.
Great. Thank you. Last question. There was recently a committee set up in the UC of 2 people. Does finance have any idea about the legislature's role? Will we be updated about the progress of that committee? prior to the March Regents meeting. Is there any outline of what the parameters are of that committee, or what can you tell me? What have you been told about that committee in finance?
So this committee is a really important effort to really address the sustainability of the UC system over the long term and to really drill down deep about the overall cost structure of the university. And I don't have all of the answers for the questions that you have about the work product, but there is a joint effort between the UC President's Office and the administration, and there's a lot of hard work that's going in to really evaluating different models, different states, universities in different states, different options for reducing the cost structure. And the overall goal is really to put the university on solid footing going forward and make it a sustainable operation going forward. So that is the intent of the committee.
Okay, the earlier we in Sub 1 can know about what that committee's doing, the earlier we can kind of target our efforts to be compatible. So appreciate any updates. Leo, any comment?
Yeah, I don't think any of the members of that committee have appropriation authority. So I had similar reaction that I think the legislature has a crucial role to play in determining how you spend your money on UC and CSU.
Thank you both. I have no further questions.
And who's paying for dinner?
That's right.
Thank you, Senator Block. We're going to move right down the line here. Senator Roth, Monning, Allen, Pan, and then we're going to Senator Mitchell and Senator Pavley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope I can keep my voice this time today. I'll save my questions on state administration and local government for Budget Subcommittee 4. But I have several concerns having to do with the budget. I won't go into them in detail, but I'm concerned about school construction funding and school bonds, have-nots and have districts, and how you deal with that. And certainly they can issue bonds and tax themselves, maybe if the voters want to do that. But what happens if the voters don't want to do that? And do we have an overriding obligation as a state to make sure that children of the state of California have an opportunity to learn in a school facility that is appropriate and is high-tech and provides them with all the equal opportunity that they clearly deserve to have. I have concerns about trial court judge funding. I've expressed those before. In 2007, this legislature authorized 50 additional trial court judges to be allocated by the Judicial Council throughout the state of California. We have not funded one single judge since 2007, as our population certainly grows and as the population shifts from the highly urbanized coastal areas into inland California from the north to the south. From my perspective, I will get to a question, by the way, but I am a lawyer. From my perspective, it's rapidly becoming a social justice issue, so I am concerned about that. I want to make sure administration knows my concern. We are going to have to deal with beginning the process of funding some of these judicial positions sometime, and maybe this is the year we ought to think about it. Now to my question. Last year at the end of the session, we were privileged, I guess, to deal with this school reserve fund budget issue that popped up at the last minute. And my concern today is the same concern I had last year, which is that the proposal, which I guess is now in statute, fails to differentiate between school reserve funds that are reserved for no particular specific purpose and school funds, district funds that are reserved for a specific purpose, whether it's a building construction fund, whether it's a self-insurance reserve, whether it's a reserve to pay retiree benefits of one sort or another, more importantly, whether it's a litigation reserve. You know, the concept of assigned versus unassigned ending balances, which I assume accountants know about and I don't, but where you have something that's reserved for a specific purpose as opposed to something that is not reserved for a particular purpose. And I can give you an example. If you are a district and you're engaged in litigation and it is not insured litigation, something that insurance covers, where you would have to reserve against the issue. And if it were a significant matter, which involved millions and millions of dollars, in many parts of California, your trial court case, if it goes to trial, won't get to trial for 5 years. And then, depending on the outcome, one side or the other, given the size of the magnitude of the problem, is undoubtedly going to appeal. And in California, in part because we don't fund additional judges, your appeal may last 2 to 3 or more years. And so you're now out at least 8 years from the start of the litigation process, not counting the start of the dispute. And if, in fact, this incident occurs that triggers the drawdown of the reserve, the contribution into this by the state into the Prop 98 reserve fund, you're then required to spend down your reserves, both assigned and unassigned, both those that are reserved for without a particular specific purpose, and as my understanding anyway, and those reserve funds that are reserved for a specific purpose, including my litigation reserve fund. And if you are required to spend it down before the end of the appeal, and then it becomes adverse, and somebody turns to you and says, write us a check, what do you do? And so my question is, has administration given any thought to making further adjustments to this reserve fund to differentiate between the assigned ending balances and unassigned ending balances to allow districts, if they can justify it against a specific need, whether it's a school construction project or a litigation reserve fund or a self-insurance reserve fund or, heaven forbid, reserving against, future retiree benefits, is there a way to carve those out of this reserve fund mess? Mess being my word. Apologize, Ms. Bosler. Is that question clear?
Yes, yes. No, I think you do make some very compelling arguments, especially around litigation and the risks of litigation that districts may be facing. We have spent considerable time working with stakeholders that were very concerned about this policy change last year, and we will continue to engage in that dialogue with those groups over the coming months to really, with the focus of protecting the financial security of school districts around the state. This was not meant to jeopardize that. I will also note that the administration does not anticipate the fiscal conditions requiring a deposit into the Proposition 98 rainy day fund over the entire forecast period. But that doesn't mean that it's not an issue that is weighing heavily on many school districts' minds, and we do continue to work with the stakeholders on this important issue.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.